when I accepted the kind invitation to be here tonight, I thought that it would be a chance to publicize my new book. And then I was told, after I accepted, that I can't read. And I'm not going to talk about it or about poetry, but I do have one short poem from the book, actually by heart. It's so short that it doesn't even have a title. The day he left, he said, I knew the reason. Look at the trees. Love only lasts a season. For years since then, I've stared at them and seen only their blackened branches beneath the green. And then I was told the subject of the evening. So I thought to myself, well, in case of emergency, start name dropping. And I have been very fortunate over my life to have met people whom other people think are famous. John the 23rd. He is now, as of yesterday, the second saint that I have met. And to find out who the other one is, you'd have to buy a copy of my book. And I've had, conversations with Igor Stravinsky and Orson Welles and Leopold Stokowski and so on. But I think that all comes out of a childhood and teenage year fascination with writing letters to people. When I was 14 or 15, I would write long, chatty letters to Nikita Khrushchev, Walt Disney, Stan Musial, Herbert Hoover, and sometimes they would write back. When I was a slightly older teenager, I would send a birthday card every year to Vladimir Nabokov at his hotel in Switzerland. And of course, as you know, Nabokov, he would never answer, of course. But years later, I was doing some research in the Berg collection at the New York Public Library, and a curator came over and whispered in my ear and took me back. And there in the Nabokov file were all of my birthday cards. I think he just kept every electric bill to sell it, at some point. But once I was asked by an interviewer, do I have heroes? And I said, yes. And as a matter of fact, I sleep with them. And then I went on to explain that on my bed, on all four walls of my bedroom, are framed letters or whatever, memorabilia from the artists and people I most admire. And I think the strangest thing I have is 2 tresses of Emily Dickinson's hair. We could clone her, I think of it. And letters from Alexander Pope or Oscar Wilde or whomever, Walt Whitman, Benjamin Britten. And the 3 that mean the most to me are directly over my head and closest, I hope, thereby to my dreams. And they are 3 people I am most drawn to because of their great souls and their discipline. And over my bed are Giuseppe Verdi, Marcel Proust, and Abraham Lincoln. An odd group. I don't know that they would get along with one another at one of these tables here, but there it is. So I wanted to tell you 3 little anecdotes about meeting people. And the first one, when I was 15, I was in Venice. I was in the 5th row center at the Fenice Opera House. How I got there, I have no memory. And of course, the Fenice, the most glittering, glamorous jewel of an opera house in the world, they didn't have seats across as they would at the Met. They had fauteuil, little armchairs there next to one another. It was so elegant. And I studied my program, and finally, in some puzzlement, pulled the sleeve of the man sitting next to me. I assumed everybody spoke English. What did I know? And I said, "Excuse me, sir, could you tell me what this means, La Traviata?" And he looked down at me, and he said, "It means the fallen woman." I said, "Thank you very much," and I went back to the program. I had no idea what a fallen woman was at all at that age. But the curtain parts, and suddenly there are women in ball gowns and champagne being poured and gold coins being flung, scorn, and the heroines coughing blood into a handkerchief. And I thought, oh my God, home at last. This is where, this was great. This was my unconscious life all up there on the stage. And when I went, dazzled, out of the theater and wandered around on the little piazza in front of it, for some reason, I can't tell why, I went over to the stage door, and out was coming the star of the evening, who was the glamorous young Anna Moffo, who was a really extraordinary beauty and a wonderful voice back then. And she had, as they all did, a short, fat, bald Italian husband. I went up to her and I said, "Hi, Miss Moffo. I live in Bryn Mawr, PA, and I knew you grew up in Wayne." And she looked at me and said, "You did? Well, come on with us. We're going to have a pizza." So in case of emergency, never hesitate to ask a question of a stranger. So the second time is when W.H. Auden was going to return to England to live out his final couple of years, he made a farewell tour of the States, which had been very good to him over the years. And he came to Yale, where I was then a graduate student. And I was excited because he was and still is my greatest literary hero. The reading was in the common room, great common room of Pearson College. The master then was John Hersey, the writer who introduced Auden. It was packed. The common room was so large it had second-story windows on it, and students had climbed onto those precarious seats in order to see the great man. I, for some reason, ended up on the floor for the reading at his feet, quite literally, and close enough to see that he was wearing mismatched socks. I remember the socks. I cannot remember what he read. As so often the case in life. But after the reading, he was taken by John Hersey on their way back to the master's house for Jello shots or whatever they were doing back then. And I went up to Auden, I rushed up to him, and I said, "Oh, Mr. Auden, would you sign my book?" And well, this was 40 years ago, say. And 40 years ago, I was not so bad looking. I backed, "Mr. Auden, would you sign my book?" And he looked me up and down, and he said, "Turn around and bend over." So I did, and of course, the whole point of that was he wanted to use my back as a desk to sign on. So, in case of emergency, do what you're told. So, I just have one other one. I don't know how many people know now of a poet. She committed suicide in about 1973 or 4, named Anne Sexton. She was quite, she was quite a thing. So I was doing my dissertation at Yale, and I was writing about the tradition of contemporary confessional poetry, and she was a very prominent figure in that, writing, Menstruation at 40 and other such poems. And I wrote to her, and I said that I would like to come and interview her for my dissertation. I received no answer. So I can't remember how I found her phone number. She lived in Newton, Massachusetts. I called her, and I said, "Oh, Miss Sexton, I wrote to you and asked for an interview. Could I do that?" "No." And I said, "Oh, come on, lady. I'm just trying to write my dissertation." "Oh, all right." And we made a date. I would come to her house in Newton, Massachusetts on such a date. I arrived at the appointed hour. I knock. One of her daughters answers the door, and I'm shown into the living room. "I'll go tell Mother you're here." She leaves, and I start paging through a week-old issue of Time magazine on the coffee table, and then Look magazine, and then Life magazine. nothing was going on. Finally, the daughter comes down and says, Mother's just not feeling well this morning, so why don't you come up with me and you can talk to her upstairs. So I go up, and there is the poetess in a white sateen negligee and puffed up on pillows in the middle of a big king-size bed, and clearly hungover, terminally. And she was a horrible alcoholic. I mean, breakfast for her, I later became a very close friend of hers, but breakfast was a vodka that size. The day would start with that, so you know how it was. So I pulled up a chair to the edge of her bed, and I introduced myself, and she said, but immediately she was not interested in me, and she began to talk about all of her ailments. And there's this, and there's that, and my teeth, and I have no idea that this tooth over here, and I just sat there politely. And a little bit goes by, and she finally is rounding up the tale of woe, and she says, and I have very sensitive nipples. You'll see. I had only met this woman 5 minutes before. So, in case of emergency, move your chair back a few inches. Okay? Thank you.